So Christmas was a week ago, and hopefully some of you guys got a new computer. If you did, today we're going to go over some of the first things you should do with a new PC. If you didn't get a new PC, well then some of these tips should hopefully help you too. Stay tuned. So whether you built your own computer or you got a pre-built, most computers come as close to their default configuration as possible. I mean, computer manufacturers are not trying to optimize settings to get the most performance. Instead, they care more about overall stability and making their job easier. And if you built your own computer, well, the configuration is all on you in that case. So today, we're going to go over the first things you should do with a new PC. But first, I gotta pay some bills, so check out today's sponsor. Is your copy of Windows 10 unactivated? Well, it doesn't have to be, because with today's sponsor, VIP SCD Key, you can get a valid Windows 10 license for under $20. Stop dealing with that stupid watermark on the desktop, the valid license for Windows 10. Also, with an activated copy of Windows 10, you can upgrade to Windows 11 for free. Just go to the link in the description below and pick up a valid Windows 10 license key. During checkout, use the code CYBERCPU for a 25% discount. Once you have your key, go to your activation settings in Windows 10 and click on the link that says Change Product Key. Enter the product key you just purchased and hit Activate. Now you don't have to deal with that stupid watermark that come with running an unactivated copy of Windows 10. Now, on with the video. So when I say that manufacturers are more concerned about reliability than performance, that's not to say that optimizing your system for performance is going to hurt its reliability. I mean, a system can be perfectly reliable and optimized for performance at the same time. You see, the issue is that performance settings can sometimes be dependent on what hardware you're using, and a lot of manufacturers don't want to spend the time to set up these properly. Also, if you bought a pre-built computer, then it probably comes with a lot of garbage pre-installed anyway. So let's jump on the computer and I'll show you some of the most important settings that you should set up first on a new computer. So here we are in Windows 11, and the first thing that we need to do is, well, turn the computer off, because we're going to go into the BIOS. So to get into your BIOS, a lot of computers are different. On mine, I just hit delete while it's posting. However, depending on what kind of computer you have, if you have a Dell, you're going to have to push F2 during post. If you have an HP, you're going to have to hit the escape key, or F10, I believe it is, in order to get into the BIOS. And if you have another computer, then you're going to have to look at the manufacturer's website to figure out how to get into your BIOS. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and shut this computer down. And once it's shut down, I'll fire it back up and I'll meet you in the BIOS. So you go ahead and get yourself into the BIOS any way you can, and I'll see you there. Okay, so here we are in my BIOS. Mine's an ASRock BIOS. Like I said, yours is going to be different, but hopefully some of these same principles should help. But as you can see here, I have 32 gigs of memory, it's DDR5, and it's currently running at 4800 megahertz. Now, I know for a fact that this is 6000 megahertz memory, so we need to take advantage of that. There's no point in paying for DDR 6000 and not taking advantage of it. So on ASRock, you have to go to OC Tweaker, and I believe this is the same on ASUS, but different motherboards are going to be different. But one way or another, you're going to have to get into your memory settings. On ASRock, you go into OC Tweaker, and then you go down into the DRAM profile configuration right here, and go ahead and click on that. And then from there, your DRAM profile setting is just set to auto right now, or mine's currently set to auto. I'm just going to go ahead and select it. I'm going to select XMP1, and that'll give me my 6000 megahertz. And at that point, you should be able to reboot the system, and it's going to go through some memory testing to make sure it can actually run at 6000 megahertz by just hitting exit and then going save changes and exit. And then this is the whole list of things that it's changing by using that XMP profile. And as soon as I hit yes, it should reboot the computer. Now, if everything went the way that it was supposed to, your system should just boot up under XMP and begin running at the new memory speed. However, if you've ever worked with XMP before, then you know that's typically not how it goes. So if your system doesn't post at the new memory speed and then reverts back to the default speed, then there's a few troubleshooting steps that you can take to try to get XMP to stick. One that I find that often helps is moving your memory from channel A to channel B, or from channel B to channel A, depending on how it's currently set up. Also, if that doesn't work, you can also try to get XMP to stick with a single stick of RAM. If that doesn't work, try it with the other stick. It may be that you just have a bad stick that won't reach the XMP speeds. And then finally, if none of that works, another option is to flash your BIOS to the latest from the motherboard manufacturer's website. Unfortunately, when it comes to memory, sometimes getting XMP to stick can be kind of frustrating. However, ultimately, I've always been able to eventually get XMP to stick, unless I was dealing with a bad stick of memory. But the fact that it's this complicated is probably one of the reasons why a lot of pre-built companies don't enable XMP in the first place. And then another consideration when enabling XMP is whether or not to do it before or after you install Windows. Personally, I like doing it before because if there's going to be any stability issues, I want to know right away. However, some people might recommend leaving XMP off until after you install Windows. Now, I understand why some people make this recommendation, but to me, if your RAM is not stable enough to install Windows, then it's probably a good idea to find that out as soon as possible so you can RMA the memory rather than, spending weeks troubleshooting weird problems that might surface because of unstable memory modules. Now, speaking of Windows, we need to talk about that for a minute. If you purchased a pre-built system, then chances are your system is going to come with Windows pre-installed. It will also come with a bunch of junk pre-installed. But if you built your own system, then obviously you're going to have to install Windows. But with that said, in both cases, I'm going to go ahead and recommend the same thing. I mean, here's the thing. In years past, I would have recommended on most systems just to remove the junk, and the pre-built install of Windows should be just fine. But now that Windows 11 requires a Microsoft account, I end up wiping Windows 11 systems right out of the gate. Now, while there are workarounds to get around the Microsoft account requirement, I just find it easier to create a USB stick with Rufus and disable that requirement altogether. The other benefit is that by reloading Windows right out of the gate, you don't have to deal with all the bloatware that came from the manufacturer. So let's jump back on the system and I'll show you how to do it. And also, we better check to see if the XMP stuck, because if it didn't, we'll have to figure out why. Let's get to it. Okay, now first thing, to see if XMP stuck, all you gotta do is right click on your taskbar, go to Task Manager, click on the Performance tab, and then click on Memory, and then right here it should show you the mega transfer speed, which in this case is 6000 for DDR6000, so it's perfect. So XMP did stick. You can always do this ahead of time if you don't want to go into the BIOS to check. You can always check in Task Manager just to make sure it's running at the right speed. You can also keep an eye on it this way too, because if you ever update or flash your BIOS, then sometimes the XMP speed can go back down to the default, which on DDR5 would be 4800, and on DDR4 I believe is 2100. And most of the time this really isn't relevant on systems that you custom build because you have to flash the BIOS in order to update the BIOS on those ones. However, if you got a cookie cutter computer like a Dell or an HP, a lot of times Windows Update can update the BIOS for you. And when that happens, it can revert the BIOS to defaults. And if it does that, it'll probably turn off XMP. So it's a good idea just to check every once in a while, just to make sure you don't need to go into the BIOS to fix it. But with that said, now we're talking about reloading Windows. So we're gonna go ahead and close this. And then the first thing that we wanna do is we wanna actually get an ISO. For that, we can just go to Microsoft's website to download the latest ISO for Windows 11. And we also need to download Rufus. And for that, we need to go to Rufus's website. Now, I already have the Windows 11 ISO downloaded, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to do it anyway. And I'll leave a link to this down in the description below. If I forget to put the links, just remind me in the comments. I usually get on it pretty quick, and I forget quite often, so bear with me there. So if we scroll down on here, you'll see that it says download Windows 11 disk image, and for that we're just going to go ahead and select the multi-edition here and go ahead and click download now, and then it's going to validate your request. Now you're going to want to pick the language of the edition that you want to download. So in this case, I'm going to choose English United States. You go ahead and choose whatever language you want, and then go ahead and hit confirm, and it's going to go ahead and validate your request again. It's going to take a minute, and then once it's done, you're going to have this little blue blue button right here that you can click that'll allow you to download the ISO. However, like I said, I've already downloaded mine, so I'm not going to download it again. And then for Rufus, we're just going to go to Rufus's website. We're going to scroll down, and then I typically download the portable version of Rufus, but if you want, you can download the installable Rufus too. It's up to you. I like the portable one because I don't have to install it. It's pretty self-explanatory, actually, if you think about it. So now that it's downloaded, we're going to go ahead and jump into our downloads folder. And as you can see, here's my Windows 11 ISO that I downloaded earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and close our browser now, and we're going to go ahead and create our USB thumb drive. But for that, first, we actually need a USB thumb drive. So go ahead and grab yourself a USB that's a minimum of 8 gigabytes. Now, the one I'm using right here, I'm pretty sure it's considerably more than 8 gigs. I think it's a 64 gig thumb drive, actually, now that I think about it. But yes, it is. It's a 64 gig thumb drive. But for that, it'll be fine. Anything over 8 gigs should work fine. This is the one I had for filming this video. And at this point, all you got to do is go ahead and launch Rufus. Go ahead and hit yes. And then I would say yes at the screen right here. This allows Rufus to be able to access the internet. There's certain features of Rufus that won't be enabled if you don't hit yes on that screen. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and pick our thumb drive, which for me is the 64 gig. And then I'm going to push the select button, and I'm going to select the Windows 11 ISO that we downloaded recently. And then from there, we're just going to wait for a minute, and we're going to let Rufus do its thing. It's going to scan the ISO and get ready to move to the next step. And it might take a minute to do that, but just go ahead and wait it out. And there we go. Now it's done. Now, since you're doing this on a new computer, then I would go ahead and leave all of these settings the same. Leave it GPT, leave it UEFI, and that should work just fine. However, if you're doing this on an older system that doesn't support GPT or is a non-UEFI BIOS, then you may need to change this to MBR. But only do that if you're doing this for an old system. If you're doing it for a new system, leave it the way it is. And at this point, go ahead and push the start button, and it's going to come up with this next user experience screen right here that allows you to disable certain features of the Windows installer. And one of the ones that I want to remove is the requirement for a Microsoft account. You can also create a local account if you want to ahead of time, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that one unchecked because typically when I create a USB drive, I keep it around to install on other people's computers, and obviously they don't want my username as a local account. So I'll go ahead and leave that one unchecked. Go ahead and hit OK. It's going to give you one more error. It's going to at least one more warning saying that it's going to wipe everything that's on the drive. So go ahead and hit OK. And at that point, it should start creating the USB drive for you. Now, at this point, all you have to do is reboot the system with the USB drive that we just created and follow the prompts to reload Windows. Now, if you built your own custom system, you're going to have to do this anyway because you have to install Windows. But like I said, I've found that this to kind of be the most efficient way to set up pre-builts with Windows 11 as well. However, once you're done, you're going to have to install drivers now. So let's jump back on the system and we'll go over that now. Like I'm going to go ahead and right click right here. I'm going to go to my device manager. And as you can see, I've got a couple unknown devices, and you might have even more once you reinstall Windows. So at this point, we're going to go through and how to rectify most of these things right here. So I know for a fact that these right here, these devices right here, these are ACPI compliant systems. Let's see if we go into details and we go into hardware IDs, these are ACPI. These are probably going to be chipset drivers. So if I go into this details tab, I can see same thing, ACPI. These are definitely going to be chipset drivers. So to solve that, we're going to go ahead and install the chipset drivers for the system. However, there's a couple of different drivers that I would highly recommend installing. And the first one is going to be your display adapter. So in this case, I have an RTX 3060. I'm going to go ahead and install the driver for an RTX 3060. Let me show you an easy way to do that. So we're going to go ahead and close the device manager. We're going to open up our browser and we're going to go download a program called NV Clean Install. Now, this is kind of a workaround to downloading Nvidia's latest drivers. By using this program, it allows you to modify the installer to not install the junkware that comes with the Nvidia installer. And I found it to be kind of an easy program to use. So I like using this whenever I'm downloading my drivers. So go ahead and click there. Pick a link and then it should download. We're going to go ahead and open our downloads folder and close our browser again, and we're going to go ahead and launch the program. Now, once we do, go ahead and hit yes to the user account control and then wait a moment and then the program should load. Now, it appears as if we have a new warning message that comes up in NV Clean Install. And if you read this, it tells you that as of driver 566.36 that you have to actually use a workaround in order to get the program to work. Now, as of the time of filming this video, you're gonna get this pop-up right here when you run NV clean install. This pop-up sounds extremely contradictory. In fact, I had to read it several times and Google what it was talking about to even understand enough to be able to make this video. It says that you have to select the NV app, and then in the next sentence, it tells you that you can uncheck the NV app. So which one is it? Do I have to install the NV app or don't I? Well, it turns out it's both. You see, here's the thing. The NV app is required to be checked with the NV clean install application, or the installer itself won't work. But the installer that launches, you can uncheck the NV app from installing from there. By the time you're watching this video, this error may not pop up. And if it doesn't, then you're good. This is in regards to Nvidia moving from the Nvidia experience to the Nvidia app. Apparently, the Nvidia app is required for the installer to work now. But once you're in the installer, you actually don't have to install the Nvidia app itself. So hopefully NV Clean Install will be able to update itself at some point to be able to handle this issue without the error. But if you get this message, then hopefully the way I explained it is better than the pop-up did, because it was kind of confusing to me too. But anyway, let's jump back on the system and continue installing the drivers. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and just hit OK and skip that. Now for right here, to install the best driver for my hardware is gonna be 566.36, or you can also manually select a driver if you want, and you can select an older version if you want to. However, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna install the latest version so we can go through the NV app issue that we were talking about before. So I'm gonna go ahead and install the best driver for my hardware and hit next. Now at this point, I typically install the driver, obviously, that's required. I typically install PhysX, and I also install the audio over HDMI. Now, most of the time I leave everything else unchecked. I always have the Visual C runtimes already installed. I don't need USB-C driver or the Framework SDK. A lot of these things right here I don't check, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to check them. You go ahead and check any one that you want. And then you also have the GeForce Experience components, which at this point, I think the GeForce Experience has been discontinued because, like I said, they're moving to the Nvidia app. However, like the pop-up said, you have to check right here. You have to check the NV app in the unknown components at the bottom right here. Now, in my testing, I don't think you need to check any of these other ones. I think you just need to check this top one, but I might be wrong. So correct me in the comments if I am, but it seems to work with just checking that one. And at this point, go ahead and hit next, and it's gonna download the display driver itself from Nvidia servers. And it might take a second to download this, but once it does, we can move on to the next step. Okay, so on the next step, this allows you to kind of tweak the install and change some settings that you may want to change in your driver install. Now you can disable telemetry and a lot of different things like that. However, I typically don't do that. What I normally do is I perform a clean install, and then I also check show expert tweaks. And then from there, I normally click the message signal interrupts, and I typically leave everything else default. At that point, I go ahead and hit next to move on. Now on this one right here, you may not even need to check message signal interrupts because I think that's pretty much default on most graphics cards nowadays. And we went through and we tested that before, and it actually does help just a little bit. So typically I always check it, but like I said, it may or may not be necessary. But once you have all the selections on this page, you can go ahead and hit next. And at this point, it allows you to install the driver. Now, I'm not going to install the driver at this point because it's going to mess up my screen recording. But like I said, all you got to do is push install, and then NV Clean Install will go ahead and do the driver install for you. Now you can do a custom install and decide what to select and not to select. In fact, we're going to go ahead and hit that real quick, and hopefully my screen record won't mess up, but we'll see what happens. So it gives you the option right here for the NVIDIA graphics drivers and NVIDIA app, or just the graphics drivers. Now, you can go ahead and select this. This is what that pop-up was talking about, is that you don't have to have the NV app selected in order to move on to the next one. But what you do is go ahead and select graphics driver only, and then agree to continue. Agree and continue. Now at this point, you can click custom and then hit next, and you can decide what you want to check and don't want to check in order to move on to the next step. Now in this case, the NVIDIA app, like I said, is unchecked and your other ones are checked, and you can go ahead and play around. This is just showing you what you selected in the last step when we were playing around with the Nvidia app. And at this point, you can go ahead and hit next and it'll install the drivers. But I'm gonna stop here on mine because I don't want it to mess up my screen recording. So we're gonna go ahead and hit cancel. And at that point, the Nvidia install, it can say installation is finished, because as far as it's concerned, it thinks the driver finished. We can go ahead and close it. And at that point, if you followed through and installed the driver, you should have the latest Nvidia driver on your computer. But now that we've done that, we've got to go ahead and figure out some of these other drivers that we have missing. So like I said, in Device Manager, we've got a couple unknown devices right here. And like I said, I know that those are chipset drivers. So we're going to go ahead and download our chipset real quick. And to do that, you just go over to AMD's website. Now, this is also where you're going to go if you have an AMD video card instead of an Nvidia video card. ATI does really good with auto detecting their video cards. However, the chipset portion of this driver right here doesn't work so well. So if you want to go ahead and install the Radeon drivers, then go ahead and download the Radeon drivers from this link right here. But if you're downloading chipset drivers, then I would go ahead and scroll down and actually pick which chipset you have manually. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and hit chipset. We're going to say AM5, and for mine, it's a B650. I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. And then it's going to give me the option for Windows 10 or Windows 11. Obviously, you're going to go ahead and pick the one that corresponds with the operating system that you're using. And then from there, I'm going to download the latest drivers, which is right here on the top. You go ahead and click the download key, and it should take a minute to download the drivers. Just like that, it's finished. We're going to go ahead and hit the folder icon. We're going to close our browser window. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and launch the Nvidia chipset drivers. Now, keep an eye right here on our device manager when we run this. You're going to go ahead and hit yes to the user account control. And we're going to let this extract. It might take a second to extract, and there it goes. And here's the installer graphic right here. And we'll go ahead and let this wait for a minute too. So there's going to be a lot of waiting when you're installing these drivers. Obviously, a lot of this software is going to take some processing power. So you have to, hopefully, the faster your system, the faster these things will go. Now, this will allow you to customize your driver. I'm going to go ahead and leave everything checked and go ahead and hit install. And it's going to go through the process of installing my chipset drivers. Hopefully, it won't mess up my screen recording, but I think it'll be okay. But while we're doing this, let's go ahead and keep an eye on this device manager right here, just to make sure that all the unknown devices get cleared up. And I might skip ahead a little bit just so you don't have to sit through this whole driver install. Okay, so as you can see, we just had a change here, and a lot of these unknown devices have disappeared. And as you can see, our system devices are open. So like I said, those were all just USB drivers, and now they're good to go. Now, it does look like we do have an unknown USB device down here. In these cases right here, a lot of times you may have to figure out why some drivers don't work. And usually for something like this, a restart should fix the problem. So essentially all you would do is go into your chipset installer and just go ahead and push restart. Now, I'm not going to do that because obviously I'm screen recording, so I don't want to do that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and hit close. But for you, the majority of these problems can typically be solved by just rebooting the system. Now, like I said, when it comes to installing drivers, some of this might take some investigative work. You have to go through the device manager until everything is installed. Windows 11 is really good at installing the majority of drivers. However, I still recommend installing your chipset drivers and your GPU drivers from the manufacturer's website, just like we did here. In regards to everything else, it's not as critical to have the latest drivers unless you're having a problem with that specific device. But obviously, if there's no driver detected for that device, then you're going to have to find that driver. Most of the time, you can start with the manufacturer's website if it's a pre-built computer. While you're there, you may have to download whatever other software might be required to control things like the RGB and other things like that. But if you've built your own system, then you're going to have to go to each specific device manufacturer's website to download their drivers. Now, most of these devices should come with the drivers. Like for instance, your motherboard will typically come with a CD that has your drivers on it. The problem though is that you probably don't have a CD-ROM to read that disk. And even if you did, the drivers on that disk are probably months old, if not years in some cases. So you might as well go to the manufacturer's website and download the latest versions of those drivers don't install the one that comes on the CD. Now, here's the thing. As long as your network driver is installed, then the rest of them are pretty easy. If your network driver didn't automatically detect, then you're going to have to download that from another computer and then at least get your network working. And then from there, you can search for where the other drivers are. Now, once you have all your drivers installed, there's one other program that I highly recommend that you pick up. Let's jump back on the system and I'll show you what it is. The next program I want to show you, this is one that I recommend using on all computers. This is one I personally use on all of my systems, and that's a program called Fan Control. It's a simple little program that controls your fans. That's it. But it's a really useful program because of how it operates. Now, here's the thing. Setting the program up initially can sometimes be a little convoluted. But once you get it set up and have it detect all of your devices, then you can move on to letting it figure out what kind of information that it can pull from those devices. Like, as you can see here, I have my pump, and I have all of my fans set up. So on this system, I have 5 fans. I have 3 of them that are on my radiators and 2 that are on my case, as well as my pump. Now, on your system, you may also have fans for your video card, which you can also control through this program. Now, I'm using a Corsair fan controller, which this program can't detect right out of the box. So in order to use this, I have to use a plugin called Corsair Link in order to use my Corsair Commander Pro. And to do that, I had to install that before I could go through the process of setting up all my fans. Now, essentially, the way that you would set this up is just go ahead and go to the fan control website, which is GitHub, and you can go ahead and download the latest version of fan control from this website here. Now, also, if you have, like in this case, I have Corsair Link, which is also available on GitHub. Now, if you have a different fan controller, then I can't help you with that. You're going to have to figure out how to get it to work. However, there are a lot of different plugins for fan control, like this one here, that will allow you to use third-party fan controllers. So you go ahead and just download this one right here. Go ahead and download the latest one, and then you can move on to the next step, which is setting up the program itself. Now, to set this program up, it usually does it by default when you first fire it up. But if you needed to install your plugins and stuff like that, it may have gotten a little messed up. So at this point, all you'd have to do is hit the wrench, and then you could go through the assisted setup, and it'll go through and test all the different fans. It'll make sure that it can control those fans and make sure that it can test your RPMs and things of that nature. But once you get all this set up, that's when it gets fun, because the way you can use this program is you can set up different curves for different things. Like, for instance, the way I have mine set up is I have a curve for my pump, I have a curve for my CPU, and a curve for my GPU. And as you can see, these are set up for the most part pretty close to the same, with the exception of my pump itself. Now, one of the things that I do set up is on my CPU and GPU, I have it so the minimum fan speed can reach 0%. This means that the fan can essentially stop. For my pump, I don't want my pump to stop. I want it to run all the time. So I set the minimum speed to 20%, and then in this case, I set the maximum speed to 80% because, well, it gets kind of loud and I don't want to hear it. So I set the maximum to 80, and that should work okay for a pump. Now, in the case for the fans themselves, I allow the maximum speed to go all the way up to 100, but I leave the minimum speed at 0. And as you can see, my fans right now are all running at around 33% because they're all set to the GPU curve. However, the nice thing about this program is that the way it works is you can set different case fans to different curves. So if I set this one up to my GPU, it's going to base its RPM off of my GPU's temperature, which in this case is 31C. So it essentially just turns the fans off so they're not spinning at all, which if that's the way you want it, that's the way you can use it. In my case, I have a water-cooled GPU, so the case fans aren't as relevant to it as they would be if it was an air-cooled GPU. However, in this situation, you could have the case fans themselves ramp up based on the GPU temperature. So if you're playing a game, your case fans will come on, but if you're just working in a Word document, they don't. So that's one of the reasons why this program is such a great program to have, is because of its ability to be used in different ways. Now, Fan Control is a great program, but it does have some limitations. If you're using a pre-built system like a Dell or an HP, then there's a chance that Fan Control won't be able to detect your fans at all. In some cases, it won't even be able to detect your CPU temperature. It's really going to depend on the system itself. But if you're using a custom built system, then you shouldn't have any problem at all. Also, by default, fan control doesn't support third-party fan controllers like I spoke about before. However, fan control does have a plugin system that allows other third-party developers to create plugins for other fan controllers. Like my system uses the Corsair iQ fan controller, and I have a plugin installed inside of fan control that allows me to control that fan controller. Either way, it's the best fan control software that I've seen. Not only does it allow you to create a lot of really advanced curve configurations, but it's also really lightweight. It's not a bloated mess like most fan control software is. And it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It controls your fans. That's kind of the point of a low overhead. Why would you want a bloated program just to control your fans? I don't know, but most fan control software sucks. This one doesn't. Now, there's lots of other things that you can do when setting up a new system. This video is not an end-all guide for setting up new systems. However, these are some of the most basic tips that'll help you start with the best foundation possible for your new computer. If you'd like to see some more things that you can do when setting up or customizing your new computer, then check out this video here that'll help you make Windows 11 just a little bit better. This video includes some mild debloating as well as restoring some older Windows apps and changing the look and feel of Windows 11 to look more like older versions of Windows. But as always, you guys have a great day.